Hi, everyone. This is Jason Barrack of Wall Street for Main Street, an independent financial journalist and managing editor of the News Doctor's Eric Dubin. Welcome back to another Welcome to Dystopia podcast. This is episode number 12. Now, Eric, in terms of what's going on in the world, I think we should first talk about Paris, and our hearts go out to the victims of the Paris attacks. But you have some interesting theories about what's going on. Now, we're having Paul Craig Roberts. He's put out, he's had some guest posts in the last day or two, and last week I think he put out a piece not too long after the attack itself about how it was a false flag. What are your views, though, on Paris?
Well, just as a point of clarification regarding Paul Craig Roberts, he's not positioning his argument as saying that it's a false flag, and in fact he's taken that stance on 9/11 and other cases where it is more his focus to spotlight the fact that we need to ask serious questions and do real investigation. And he presents ideas that others have written as guest posts on his website, pursuant to that. He's trying to make people stop and think, and it may have been a false flag, but he's not actually advocating that position. He's just making it clear that the vast majority of the organs of Western media, mainstream and to some extent even the alternative press, really just don't focus correctly on true investigative reporting and rational journalism. So that's where he's coming from, and I'm going to be able to explore that in more detail tomorrow because he and I are scheduled to do an interview, and I'm very much looking forward to that. And we do have to kind of frame this in a way that'll help people who do, in fact, leap to the conclusion that this is a false flag. The reality is that even if it isn't a false flag, the outcome in terms of the response of the West is exactly what is in the best interests of the forces within the West that benefit from ever-increasing consolidation of political power and the reduction of civil liberties and the ramping up of the war machine and on and on. There are elements within the Western power elite that, in fact, benefit from these kind of developments, and it's unfortunate, and that's just the way the world is structured. Even the use of terrorism as a tool, as a means of stirring up local factions within any given nation and creating instability is, in fact, formal United States policy. ISIS is, in the very least, partially a creature that was developed and nurtured by what the United States and Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations and Turkey and the United Kingdom, in fact, have helped to develop. So in a roundabout way, when people think about false flag and look at the question as to who benefits from any kind of event, the reality is that whether it's a false flag or not, the same interests are going to benefit from this unfortunate incident. And that's really the base level understanding that people need to kind of tuck in the back of their mind when they look at this question and try to figure out what the heck went on, because in reality, whether it's a false flag or not, we're dealing with ramifications that still move us in a direction that has a lot of negative things when it comes to the destruction of our civil liberties and on and on. And I will also say as well, along the same lines of trying to step back and get some perspective on this and encourage people to frame their thinking process on a certain way, this whole bigger picture context of Western nations furthering the basic structure of what is, in fact, an Anglo-American, roughly defined, or Anglicist, or however you want to call it, empire. I mean, the majority of the economic and geopolitical interests that come under the banner of the direction that the United States and then Anglicist NATO alliance would like to see as far as a world order is concerned that helps further the interests associated with that world order, is something that's provisioned, and the mechanics by which that actually is put into place and supported are furthered by these regional wars and efforts to topple Assad, as but an example, or topple Gaddafi, and rework the entire map of the Middle East. I mean, these things are not conspiracy theories. These things are discussed openly in think tanks and splashed across the pages of the New York Times. In fact, I'll provide a link that we can put in our write-up for the show, in the YouTube portion, as well as what I put on the News Doctors, that'll demonstrate this. And I encourage people to look at this stuff, because that's really what's going on here. We have, in the last couple of months, I'm sure people will recall, we had major generals and joint chiefs of staff and politicians talking in the media about, well, we really need to support these quote-unquote moderate terrorists so that we can make sure that the Syrian people can see the Assad pack his bags and leave office, and then we're supporting the Syrian people. And it's always framed in the context of, well, there's an evil dictator, people are being repressed, and it's the moral responsibility of the United States to prevent the next Hitler. How many times have we heard these arguments? I mean, Saddam Hussein is the next Hitler, on and on and on. And
but the U.S. put Saddam in power, right? We gave him money and trained him, and and then lost.
Well, yeah, actually, that's true. In the 1960s, he came from up in the ranks in an officer coup, and he was our boy and supported our interests. And then, it's kind of ironic, because then we ended up using a proxy war construct to try to weaken both sides of Iran and Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war in the 80s. So, these modalities of managing empire are classic and used throughout history. Used by the British to great effect. They were used in a slightly different version in the Roman Empire, and this is just the way by which geopolitical advantage can be secured in managing one's empire. And the United States has an empire, and if people find that producing a rather large amount of cognitive dissonance, and they think I'm crazy for saying those words, well, even Karl Rove back in 2008 openly spoke to a reporter in the New York Times and basically admonishing him, saying that, hey, we are an empire now. You report what we decide, and we manufacture reality as an empire. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, I'm butchering the quote, but it is in essence an accurate paraphrasing of where he was describing how the United States is an empire. So it's not like, major people within the United States will openly admit this kind of thing, and that's in fact the whole goal of a unipolar world order. The Project for New American Century. It's a neocon think tank that was formed in the very late 1990s, and they published a report called the Project for a New American Century, and I believe that was in 2000 that it was published, and one of the co-chairs of that organization was Robert Kagan, who is the husband of none other than Victoria Nuland, the current U.S. Secretary of State, or Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, who played an instrumental role in fomenting the coup d'etat that eventually manifested in the Ukraine, much the product of Western intervention. That's how things like this unfold. It's, you divide the local factions and support a particular faction that more represents the interests that would be in agreement with those that are defined by the NATO alliance in the case of the Ukrainian situation, and it's a divide and conquer tactic, and they call them colored revolutions, and they are in fact revolutions that are fomented from outside forces. And that is what happened to Syria, and now we see this whole attempt to blame Russia for this exodus of refugees that are flowing into Europe, and in fact the attempt to pin this whole Paris attack on Russia because they claim that the refugees are fleeing because Russia started bombing within the last 45 days. Well, the rump of the damage of the civil war that's been going on since 4 or 5 years or so is why there have been...
The refugees are also leaving not necessarily because of Russia. They're leaving because of the tactics ISIS does on women and children, right?
Well,
they're not very... the human rights violations that are being committed are atrocious, correct?
Absolutely, and they had been moving before Russia started even bombing. I mean, so to try to say that this has got something to do with Russia bombing is just, regardless of one's political leanings and interpretation of what really is going on, it's just a timeline fact. Russia bombed well after refugees were on the move. So to try to claim that this is Russia is ridiculous.
It's a 2-minute sheeple explanation that people can bring up at the water cooler, like, oh, look at me, I'm so smart. I paid attention to the news for 2 minutes instead of watching sports or the Kardashians. So
yeah, and to paint the evil dictator or, person who seeks to reboot the Soviet Union empire in the form of Putin. And all of the imagery that you see in the media with Putin with the dark glasses and a nuclear cloud on the Newsweek magazine cover, what was it, a year plus ago? I don't remember the exact date. I mean, that kind of stuff is just pervasive in the Western messaging and attempt to frame reality when reality is very much more complicated than that. So the bottom line with Paris is that I think that it's the most probable scenario that this was not a false flag, that we're talking about real ISIS terrorists, and that, you can look at some things that speak to the fact that it was probably just bumbling terrorists that weren't particularly very sophisticated. I mean, driving around in a van with Kalashnikovs and blowing away people is not exactly a very sophisticated operation. I mean, compare it to, say, trying to take down subway stations and or even 9/11, where the official narrative, and I'm not going to get into 9/11 analysis because it would take us an hour, but the official narrative is that 19 guys with box cutters take down the entire United States military defense system and are able to take down 2 skyscrapers. That's a sophisticated operation, not guys running around in a van with Kalashnikovs and suicide bombers that are trying to get through to a soccer game and they can't even get into the damn stadium without blowing themselves up. And the whole passport thing, look, if they, as ISIS, would like to have people believe that they're in fact ISIS, well, they have an incentive to carry passports as well too. I mean, so all of this said is kind of superfluous, again, in the sense, and I don't want to minimize it, but in a sense that the reality is that when people make the argument about the false flag thesis, they're claiming and stating that the powers that be are furthering their interests by executing a false flag. And the reality is that ISIS is, in the very least, to a large extent, created by the West in the first place, and that the West's interests are being served by this attack, and you don't need a false flag to be able to have the West's interests being served by this attack. And maybe you can call it a kind of a quasi-false flag, because in a rather weird chain of logic, you can think about it in those terms, because the West did, in fact, play a huge role in the creation of ISIS in the first place. So ISIS is a rogue element now. They have their own interests. They've been created and now a rogue, and we've got a major problem with them. And this happens a lot. I mean, the very initiation of using Islamic terrorism as a means to take down the Soviet Union.
They're playing with fire. I mean, the U.S. has a track record of trying to do this, right? During the Afghanistan war, they funded the Taliban, right, and Al-Qaeda to fight on the U.S. side against the Soviets, because they thought the Afghanistan was going to be the Soviets' Vietnam, right? And, they've funded other crackpot the U.S. has funded other crackpot dictators like Saddam Hussein and so many others, and then they lose control of them and things like that. So it seems like this is a predictable pattern with ISIS, that this was an eventuality that they were going to lose control.
Yeah, well, actually, we always had control with Saddam Hussein, and then we sent him off on our the attacking of Kuwait, because we gave him the green light through April Gillespie, basically signaling through a meeting with Saddam Hussein that we do not take a formal position in your inter-Arab dispute with Kuwait and the oil fields. And it was only a couple months thereafter that Saddam Hussein rolled tanks. And I happened to be in Cairo at the time. It was a very interesting time. Wow. Story for another day. But I want to pull the Zbigniew Brzezinski quote that I put together for a piece, and fortunately I don't have that in front of me right away. We can...
Well, let me just add that with the Paris attacks, I don't think we're ever going to fully get the truth. And, you know, people who are saying, oh, you know, I believe the government story, or, oh, it's definitely a false flag, the truth is probably somewhere in between. There's a lot of gray area in life. Life is normally not absolutes in black and white, in most cases at least. So there's probably a lot of gray area where it was some type of sophisticated plot or things like that. And,
yeah,
you know, there's...
And you brought up Paul Craig Roberts to introduce this discussion, and one of the things that was the most interesting bit of news I think that's surfaced so far was his report from a credible source that he hasn't revealed, and frankly I think he's keeping it quiet because he doesn't want to injure the source or get any flack directly from himself either, but that in fact there's some speculation that a very major cyber attack took down the ability of the French to be able to execute their command and control systems within their intelligence apparatus. And if that is in fact true, then that strongly implies that there's some level of state involvement. Now, which state is another question, but state involvement nonetheless. I mean, ISIS, yeah, they've been making a lot of money from selling oil on the black market at $10 a barrel, and they've been able to make a lot of money from stealing artifacts and crime. I mean, it's basically a crime syndicate, frankly. And
well, so is government. Government's a crime syndicate too.
Yeah. And in fact, yeah, that could be another whole 2-hour show. But the reality is that ISIS really isn't that sophisticated, even though they got a lot of money and they can buy the computer programming services theoretically, and maybe some people who are already skilled enough to be pretty decent hackers and whatnot have fallen into their fold ideologically. The reality is that when you get that deep into the network systems, you're talking about a level of sophistication that's pretty intense, and I don't think ISIS has that ability. I mean, money doesn't buy you everything. I mean, remember that funny story where they were putting out bids for contractor oil workers to work their fields that they stole? I mean, yeah, who's going to respond to that? Like, okay, I'm going to go and be an oil technician and work for people that might cut off my head if I don't produce 10 gallons a minute instead of 5.
Yeah, well, the world's gone really crazy lately, but yeah, I did read Paul Craig Roberts' article, and he has some interesting things up there. We'll put a link for our listeners in the show notes to go read the article so they can think for themselves. I want to move on to some economic topics, though, since we've taken the first 18 minutes of the show to cover this quite a bit. Maybe we can get, you said you're going to interview Paul Craig Roberts, so hopefully he can speak on this issue more. Definitely not an expert with a lot of the geopolitics, even though I have a political degree, so we'll hear what Paul Craig Roberts has to say more about the Paris attacks in the next week or so.
Yeah, definitely.
Now I want to move on. Let's talk about the comments that are coming out. There's articles, whether it's Reuters, I think there was also one on Bloomberg, about Christine Lagarde's comments on China, the RMB going into the SDR. You have an interesting take on it, Eric. What's your opinion of these stories that are coming out?
Bloomberg put out an article on November 13th, and in that article, it basically set a tone that people are misinterpreting. The headline was, Yuan set to join IMF basket and step towards currency big leagues. Well, yes, the IMF staff has come to the conclusion that the yuan, the renminbi, is a qualified currency because of the extent to which it's being used in the world. But that's not the same thing as saying that the IMF, in fact, has come to that voting decision. It's just that Christine Lagarde is basically not doing anything different than what she already did back in, I believe it was April, when she made the public declaration that she's, one, completely in favor of the SDR opening up to the renminbi, and two, that she believes that the managing staff and the vote should go in that direction, and that's what her recommendation is. It's a little bit unusual that an IMF managing director would be making that kind of a public relations statement, and that's kind of what they're doing. But that being said, the vote is going to be on November 30th. The United States controls 16.7% voting share. The votes are cast by Jack Lew, United States Treasury Secretary. Everything that Jack Lew has said in the media about his opinion and in reflection of the United States official position on Chinese renminbi inclusion into the SDR has been basically, well, yes, it's a well-used currency and blah, 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 but there's still structural things that have to take place, and he's referring to, further liberalization and opening up of the capital markets and Chinese financial markets and further transparency and so forth. And there is a division within the ruling centers of power in the United States. There's a portion that want to see China open up and be included into the SDR, and there's a portion of this same overall mass that don't want to see it. And my assessment, based on looking really closely at what people are saying and trying to glean from that, based on where those power centers are in reflection to these individuals, because you can just look at their background and where they come from and what positions they hold and whatnot, and gain a little bit of insight in terms of what the official position is from the United States perspective, at least in terms of Jack Lew and the power of the Treasury. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the IMF is going to vote November 30th for inclusion of the renminbi, because you need 85% of the votes cast to formally change the IMF's SDR basket. And therefore, with 16.7% voting share in the United States' hands, they have veto power. Now, if you look at the media coverage that's been showering through the blogosphere and even the lesser media that isn't as well schooled in financial issues, unlike Bloomberg, you get this sense that this is a story that is a done deal, that IMF has already voted and that the decision has been made, and that isn't the case. I think that the SDR basket will, in fact, be expanded to include the renminbi, but I think that it's a pretty decent possibility that the formal vote that happens on November 30th will be no. And that's not what people are concluding right now, because the media process by which this story was reported has resulted in a lot of misunderstandings. And it's in part just generic lack of financial savvy by the Bloomberg editor, maybe, or the person who wrote the original story. I don't know. I mean, when you read the story in Bloomberg, if you have an understanding of how the IMF voting process works and whatnot, you can understand that the story is not saying that the renminbi has, in fact, been a foregone conclusion as to being added. But a lot of people don't have that context, so that's how these stories just go viral with a conclusion that is, in fact, not true, at least not true yet. So
yeah, and as soon as the dollar, and these same stories, then they extrapolate then, and as soon as the RMB is added to the SDR, the dollar is going to collapse overnight, gold and silver are going to soar. That's not the way things are going to work out. I mean, it's going to take, I agree with you, eventually it's an eventuality that the SDR is going to be in the, that the RMB is going to be in the SDR basket, but I can't give you an exact date when that's going to occur. But even when that does occur, it's not going to happen overnight that the dollar is going to lose all of its reserve power. I mean, there's still going to be a good portion of dollar reserves, but it's going to take at least 6 to 12 months, at least, I would say, before we would start to see the effects of, the dollar losing a lot of purchasing power, maybe, in a long-term trend then, because not as many people are holding dollars as reserves.
Yeah, the timeline by which that evolution would unfold is even beyond months. It's years. It would be probably like 18 months, 2 years before you see the U.S. dollar share of roughly something like 60%. I forget the exact share that the U.S. dollar comprises in terms of reserves in central banks around the world right now, but it's about 60%. It used to be above 70 about 10 some odd years ago. And it's been in a process of decline, and the renminbi being added to the SDR basket would move it from 2 or so percent reserve status to 5-6% or so within a year's time, and those kind of ripples are pretty significant because you're talking about basically $1 trillion plus worth of reserves we're speaking about in terms of what's held in central banks around the world. So when you tweak percentages, it does have a big impact, but it's going to be an evolutionary style development. Now, we should also state, just so people can understand the context about this stuff in more clarity, is that it's not just reserves that are important in terms of what's being stashed in the central banks around the world and how that facilitates world trade, but in fact the bigger picture is being driven by just currency usage percentages for transaction of trade on a daily basis, and now the renminbi is the number 2 currency in the world. So that is just as important in terms of where the dollar's purchasing power will represent over the longer term, because as the Chinese renminbi is more greatly used in international trade, it drives everything else, including the percentage that's reflected in formal reserves held by central banks. So the SDR addition is going to speed up the process of the renminbi's holdings within central banking holdings as a percentage, and that's why, amongst other things, China wants it. But it's not necessary per se, or necessary condition for China's renminbi to be ever more used on an international basis. And the decline of the dollar's usage, and in turn its purchasing power as a result, given lower demand for the dollar.
Yeah, and one of the ways China is opening up its currency for transactional usage is they've done a lot of currency swaps with their trading partners. So a lot of these trading partners were commodity currencies. They're developing countries. They leverage their economies with massive amounts of debt, normally in U.S. dollar-denominated debt, to export commodities, normally base metals or agriculture or oil, to China. And, now with these commodity prices in major busts, oil's been in a big bust for 12 months now. It's below $40 a barrel, which is insanely cheap. We have these coppers down a lot. And China, one of the main news stories that came across my desk, and I haven't heard many people talk about this, Eric, I sent it to you when it came out a couple of weeks ago, about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, was that it wasn't obviously in the mainstream press, was that China is negotiating a large bailout currency swap, massive one, says at least $3 billion according to this article, but that's just the stated number. Obviously, I'm sure it's going to be larger than that. It's going to be to Venezuela, who's complete and totally broke, didn't save much of their money from higher oil prices, and that country is so poorly mismanaged, it's going through hyperinflation, there's shortages of basic everyday items, and also the $700 12-pack of condoms you can buy on the black market. So, China, though, I said this, it was controversial about a year and a half ago. I started saying this, it was a possibility. I was like, you know what, a lot of these developing countries, China can come in if it wants and start doing separate currency swap deals with these countries like Venezuela and say, you know what, you can default on your dollar-denominated debt to U.S. banks, and we'll just bail you out. It's a strategic default then. So, I thought it was always a possibility. I didn't think it was guaranteed. It was a theory of mine that it could happen. And it looks like, Venezuela, out of necessity, because it's a communist country and it's so poorly mismanaged, their only major assets are their oil reserves because, they don't allow any investment into the country, no foreign direct investment, really. So now that the oil price is low and they've spent all the money, they haven't saved enough, they're in real trouble.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the $3 billion, because the hole that Venezuela has dug themselves into is a lot bigger than $300 billion's ability to fix.
Oh, yeah, the stated number in the news article, and we could put a link in the show notes, it says only $3 billion, but that's maybe buying Venezuela a couple months. That's like going to the payday loan place, to save yourself for a month or two, and using a payday loan or something like that, or a loan shark to pay off your credit card bills for a month or two while opening new credit cards along the way with teaser rates. So Venezuela is in that much trouble. And this is what happens with communism. There's no jobs. They have shortages and wage and price controls. Venezuela is a total disaster. And I'm sure the people in power will figure out a way to blame it on the capitalists.
Well, yeah, that spin is definitely something they can pull right off the shelf and use as an excuse.
Okay, so I want to move on to the next topic now, Eric, and that's the retail sales. We haven't even hit Black Monday yet. We've seen some individual consumer discretionary retailers. We've seen Dick's Sporting Goods, which is a major one. That's a real popular gift-giving one. They had really bad revenues and earnings announcements recently, and I'm starting to see in my emails a lot of Cyber Monday deals, and it's not even Cyber Monday that are already starting. So people, a lot of these retailers are already down to deep discounting. It's going to be interesting when the quarter's over after Christmas, after Black Friday, after Christmas, and the numbers are bad. It's going to be interesting to see what type of excuses the people in power and Wall Street and stuff are going to give this time.
Yeah, there definitely will be excuses. Maybe it'll be the weather this time. Who knows? Mother Nature might play a big role. And your point about the discretionary sale market and signal intelligence value that Dick's Sporting Goods represents is actually pretty fascinating. I like that. You would see the discretionary purchases curtailed first when people are trying to cut back, and that is really important that you see something like that at Dick's Sporting Goods. And we also see, even the higher end of retail suffering with Nordstrom's report a few weeks back. I think it was like about 2 weeks ago. I forget. But, the market reaction had the stock get sliced pretty significantly, which is a clear indication that the expectations built into the understanding of what's going on at the middle class and higher end. Nordstrom's is not super high end, but it's still nonetheless a representative of what more wealthy people are doing finance-wise, and they're cutting back too. There's a huge reduction in retail sales across the board. You're starting to see that being signaled in stocks as well too. But because we live in a world where there's this management of perception economics and the Keynesian market savants who are managing everything, keeping interest rates under wraps and manipulating markets to keep the Ponzi going, it hasn't really broken through to a general market reaction. And this is kind of scary because when you think about what we already know from retail so far, we're setting up for a really ugly Christmas holiday season. And I think that could conceivably serve as a catalyst that would ultimately bring the next big phase of downward action in stock market.
The real economic data we're seeing, like the jobs report of a couple weeks ago that Paul Craig Roberts also wrote a long article on, how the majority of the 271,000 jobs were created either with the birth-death model, or they went to part-time jobs of adults over age 55 in service and bartender and things like that. So a lot of the adult males age 25 to 54 in the United States, they're not getting good jobs right now. They're still unemployed, and we've also seen, a lot of evidence of this come out that, so many, I think it's almost 50% in many states in the United States of adult males, right out of college or even like in their low to mid 30s are living at home with their parents in their basement or back in their room, things like that. And yet, the divergence then is at the top, the people due to the Cantillon effect who have gotten this cheap money with carry trades and quantitative easing, who have been able to borrow at 0 or near 1, leverage up, with big bets. We see these guys paying record amounts of money for artwork. So we see the $170.4 million sale at auction for Modigliani, and that's in the 9-figure club, Amedeo Modigliani's New Cucce from 1917. Hopefully I didn't mess that up too bad if you're into art. But it's a divergence here, and free markets and capitalism get blamed, but it's crony capitalism, it's big government that are creating, the making it difficult, because look how much healthcare premiums have risen for a lot of jobs. There's a lot of jobs available that are only part-time because the business owners can't pay the increased healthcare costs and things like that. And
that reality was well understood. It's not some unintended consequence. It was a really easy thing to be able to, recognize as a high probability outcome. Rational actors running businesses don't want to pay really high premiums, so they reduce job and employment on their ranks to 29.5 hours for a lot of their employees. Turn into a part-time economy, bifurcated economy. A huge percentage of the economy and the jobs that it creates are low paying now, and Obamacare definitely added to that dynamic.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yet, a lot of people out there who are blind ideologues who have been brainwashed through their whole year in government schools and by the mainstream media and by the Democratic Party, they're going to blame the evil, greedy capitalist. It's the business owner's fault, the small business guy, that he can't pay you more. Well, you know what? If he pays you more, he has no profit and he's going to go out of business. Yeah. And I'm sure he's already leveraged up to the hilt too. I know there's a good amount of small business owners out there. If you watch these shows like Bar Rescue with John Taffer on the Spike Network or Restaurant Impossible, I mean, most people don't realize this, but a lot of these small business owners are in debt up to their eyeballs just keeping the business running. Yeah. So any little increase in costs, and they're in the hole too. So it's something that's just not talked about really in polite conversation and in the mainstream anymore.
Yep, indeed. And Obamacare is another one of those subjects that we should probably tackle sometime. Maybe even invite Dr. Janda on and talk to him about it. He's a wealth of information. I mean, the bottom line with Obamacare was that even if you come at it from the perspective of a progressive, you really believe in this stuff, the reality of Obamacare is about the reduction of services provided to, in theory, try to save costs. And in reality, it's something that essentially institutionalizes greater forces of oligopolization, the reduction of the number of sellers or the concentration of existing sellers into more favorable environment in terms of the regulatory structures that support their business. Obamacare was written by the medical industry and principally the pharmaceutical and insurance industries. And it serves their interest. It's not about reducing costs or improving health care. It's about improving the profitability of the medical institutions in the United States and the overall medical infrastructure, the whole industry itself. And people are going to see that in spades next year because premiums are going to go up on average about 40% across the board, and that's going to slap people upside the head. There's going to be huge political debate and rekindling of, Obamacare is something that has to be changed and so on. And it's quite a disaster unfolding, and people are going to recognize this and say about February. We're going to see tons and tons of news stories about this in February and March. Just watch.
Yeah, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare. I mean, these things have been done by the insurance industries and the middlemen who don't provide a lot of value to the main parts of the healthcare system are the patient and the doctor. Mm-hmm. And, the people in the middle really hurt everything else because the doctor then can only spend 2 minutes taking care of you because he has to meet his quota then. Because if he doesn't see, 20, 30 patients a day, he doesn't make the same amount of money he did 5-10 years ago. So this system has created, ridden by crony capitalists and other corrupt people, where the people in the middle make a lot of money. There's perpetual cost increases, and you don't get a higher quality goods and service at a lower price. All it creates, besides that too, is a lot of people in the middle, Eric, to handle paperwork. When I go to my doctor's office, there's like 7 or 8 people there at the doctor's office who all handle in the paperwork department. I think they're playing on their phone all day. They take a 2-hour lunch. They're getting paid $40,000 or $50,000 a year with full benefits and things like that, and they don't get fired. So, and they're doing like almost no work. And these things are going to create, these new legislations are going to create even more of those types where, the patient wants to be paying less, the doctor should be getting a good amount of money to see less patients and take better quality care of them, and that's not the case. I mean, with my doctor, I'm lucky if I get 5 minutes with him now, because, and I think that's the way it is with almost everyone's doctor if you're in the system.
Yeah, and the reality is that there are a whole swath of programs and policies and ideas that could, in fact, really address the problem of a healthcare system that has screwed up pricing and results in a very onerous system that is too expensive. I mean, as but one example, to remove regulations that have no other purpose other than to facilitate the process of concentrating economic power in an oligopoly system of insurance. We have insurance companies that are not allowed to compete across state lines to get business. I mean, when you think about car insurance and Flo, advertising for Progressive on television every day, thank you, Warren Buffett, I mean, we have car insurance now that's a lot cheaper because that market was liberalized. And what downside could there possibly be to liberalizing insurance sales for medical insurance across the board, across the state?
It would hurt their profits. They won't allow it.
Exactly. There is no...
Like the utility companies, how they have government-sanctioned, government-protected local monopoly.
Well, that's a little bit different, and because, you're talking about a fixed infrastructure and scale industry such that, at least theoretically, you can make an economic argument that you have a natural monopoly, as it's spoken of in the field of economics, and that therefore you just have to regulate the utility company, blah, blah, blah. You know all that, and all of our listeners are really savvy economically. They get it. Insurance, from a medical point of view, is a completely different thing. There are no social negative outcomes to liberalizing the sale of insurance across state borders. I mean, the only thing that justifies that regulation is the furtherance of oligopoly power in the insurance industry, and it got there because they used campaign donations and lobbying to make that regulation the lay of the land.
Yeah, well said. I agree with you on that. There should be competition all across the United States, and it would lead to more efficiencies. People can move the paperwork online, maybe, instead of having 8 people at the medical office in charge of paperwork where they don't do their job. There's all those filing cabinets and stuff at the medical office I go to. There's at least 6 people there who don't seem to me to do anything. In fact, when I go in there, they're normally asleep.
To remove these
on the job.
To remove these onerous regulations, you could conceivably see as much as 10% of the costs of the entire medical delivery system in the United States shaved off the top. I mean, you talk about low-hanging fruit for cost reduction, but instead we get our politicians captured by the medical insurance industries and the big pharma and on, putting forward programs that are just asinine. I mean, Obamacare is going to result in lower quality of care delivered to people at a higher price, and in fact even less people covered and receiving medical care, which is the exact opposite of what everybody thought was going to happen when they bought into the propaganda.
It's also cost shifting too, which they deny, is where the sick people, the rest of society is going to have to pay for their care.
That's right.
The sick people can't afford it. There's going to be massive amounts of that. I mean, that already occurs. Paying your bill at the hospital and stuff like that. When people who are sick come in and can't pay their hospital bill, how the healthy people who can pay their bill have to that cost is except it's amortized over that. But I mean, the government has been intervening in the healthcare market since the 1920s and 30s. Since they won't talk about this in history books, but FDR imposed wage and price controls during the Great Depression after 1929, and one of the ways was their employer gave health insurance and things like that, and that was government mandated and stuff like that. So the government has been involved in massive intervention in the healthcare system for over 100 years.
Yeah.
And yet capitalism gets blamed for all the problems in the healthcare industry. And then you add in Medicare and Medicaid, which, were ridiculous. The promises that LBJ made when he got those things passed are insane. Go back and look up. He said, it's guaranteed that, these are only going to cost this amount of money, and, these are going to create efficiencies, and it's done nothing of the sorts.
Yeah, and there's other ways of creating a social safety net without, trying to change the entire organizational structure of an industry with hyper-regulation, and that's essentially what we have. So, I mean, I say to the progressives, you can have your cake and eat it too. It's theoretically possible to create a system. It's theoretically possible to create a system that's free market driven, but at least has some elements that could conceivably help people that get stuck. I mean, like you said before, the world's complicated, and then the truth and best policies thereafter are in the shades of gray.
Yep. Well, the funny thing though, Eric, is that the people in power, like the people who want this, they say that, there's not enough regulation, but we have too much regulation, and that's what's hurting the cost, because there's so much compliance issues, and doctors and doctors' offices are required to have X number of regulatory staff on file and things like that, and a lot of them don't really do that much. So it's just very frustrating. I'm sure we could talk. My dad's a retired doctor, so I've heard a lot of stories about this, dealing with the insurance companies and getting screwed over and things like that. We can maybe in the future we could talk more. We have a couple more stories before Scumbag of the Week nominees. I heard a very interesting story from a friend of mine. I won't use his name, but a couple of years ago, I think it was around 2011, he said he lives in the New York City, near New Jersey area, and he was at a Bloomberg conference, and former head of the CFTC, Gary Gensler, was there, and he was actually giving a speech, and he heard some very interesting things from Gensler. And by the way, this was in front of, billionaire, big shot hedge fund managers and other big shot money managers and a lot of famous Wall Street traders and a lot of famous people that you see on the business television from the mainstream financial media. And someone after Gensler gave some type of talk, someone raised their hand and asked a question in the audience asking about gold and silver price manipulation, because this was 2011, and we had seen the prices start to go down a lot. And Gensler said, yes, gold and silver are heavily manipulated, but what he said is people have to assume that everything that can be manipulated is manipulated. So he gave like a qualified answer, and then he went into the typical government bureaucrat BS, which if you live around the D.C. area, I'm sure you hear this all the time. I know I do from my friends who work in different government agencies, that, we could be more efficient if we had more time and more people and more money and more resources. It's repeated ad nauseum. So he said, we could stop all these manipulations in all these different markets if we had all these different things. And, obviously Gensler's gone, and now I think, Eric, that he's the head of campaign finance for the Hillary Clinton campaign. So
yeah, let's hope that is a decision he made that will not further his career when she goes down. I mean, I think that Trump is probably going to be elected, but we'll see. But in any event, Bart Chilton, who was one of the 5 commissioners serving when Gary Gensler was the chairman, came out and talked about how, we have a big problem with high-frequency trading, and they're manipulating markets left and right, and we just can't stop them because we don't have enough funds. And please help us. The subtext of his message is like, hey, if you want to stop manipulation, don't blame us. Give us more money. I'm like, please. Back in the 2008, 2009 crash, people looked at in terms of what the Securities and Exchange Commission had been doing, and a certain percentage of their employees were too busy watching porno and not doing their jobs.
Well, Bart's definitely a hypocrite. I mean, look what he's done now. He talked the talk about, there's manipulation in gold and silver. I remember listening to him on Financial Sense, go on there in a minute, on the Financial Sense News Hour a number of times and talk about the manipulation at length. And, he obviously said that stuff about the HFT trading, too, that is manipulated. And yet, look, he took a job as a high-powered lobbyist, and he's protecting the HFT guys that he said were manipulated.
That's right.
So, it's he's not doing what he says. He's doing the opposite.
Yeah.
But I guess all that money is really tempting.
The revolving door is everywhere. Every agency in the federal bureaucracy, the revolving door is spinning at 100 miles an hour.
It's tempting to make, 6 or 7 figures and drive around BMW or Mercedes here in the Washington, D.C. area and get to eat at 4- and 5-star restaurants at least once or twice a week and write the stuff off, on your taxes and things like that. So, this is the life here. Most people who haven't lived in D.C. don't fully understand this. There's documentaries out there called The Best Government Money Could Buy. You should go watch that documentary. It's a very good one. That one's about lobbying and things like that and how corporations and special interests look at lobbying now. But I just wanted to share that.
Let me just put a footnote on that because, Chilton is a great example. It isn't necessarily all of the perks that they get that is the cement that bonds them to the special interests they're serving. It's the threat that if they don't continue to serve those special interests, their entire career goes up in smoke. And never mind all the great steak dinners and whatnot, they wouldn't be able to be employed in any way, shape, or form in the industry that they're in. That's really the power that the system just kind of creates automatically by people following their own self-directed sense of what's in their best interest. And a lot of times people think about grand conspiracies and manipulation and so forth, and there is a level of that going on, but there's also a basic mortar, a basic cement at the ground level in terms of individuals and their relationship to the system that in fact helps the system generate outcomes that we all see. It's not just all pure conspiracy. It's also just the generic rhythms, so to speak, that the system generates because people are following their own sense of self-interest.
Yeah, so I think it was very telling, though, what Gensler said. I mean, he admitted about the manipulation for gold and silver, but then he went into, well, every other market's basically, I'm paraphrasing, I'm summarizing kind of what he said, what I was told he said, is that, everything is manipulated and there's not much we can do about it. So going forward, I guess our listeners have to assume then that there's going to be a lot of volatility up and down because there's going to be a lot of manipulation in every single market. I mean, look, the market movements for a lot of these markets are becoming ridiculously predictable, how the stock market's being propped up. I remember doing that video, Eric, I think like 3 or 4 months ago now, about how the chart pattern for all the general stock market indices was really bad. It was cliff diving. And they've improved the charts. They've repainted them now
right,
where it's not in a full cliff dive again.
Right.
So you have massive attempts at different types of intervention throughout all these different markets.
Yep, and we're going to see some of that chart painting and enthusiasm in a burst that comes when Yellen and her merry band of central bankers decide to not raise interest rates in December, and that's a foregone conclusion at this point, given what's going on in the retail sector. And they're going to say, well, we're data dependent. We've been telling you we're data dependent all along, and because the data, I'm not saying this outright, but because the data is so stinky, they're going to use that as a justification for not raising interest rates in December, and most likely the markets are going to respond positively to that. We'll have a big burst, and there's some chart painting for you going into this Christmas selling season when, in fact, everything is really weak right now. But the financial markets will still go up, and that's an example of how they paint the tape and attempt to do management of perspective economics executed in service of painting people's perspective on the markets. Watch it, and that's going to unfold halfway through December. Probably will be a damn good shorting opportunity, frankly, as we move into 2016.
Well, I did say a while ago that I thought individual consumer discretionary incomes were income companies. So like the retail stores and the restaurants, they weren't going to be bailed out by the Federal Reserve or by Wall Street. So we are seeing some evidence that those, when they do have bad earnings, those stocks take a dive, but they're not taking permanent dives though yet. Mm-hmm. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens going forward. Although I think I'm surprised maybe it's hopium from the mainstream financial media on Wall Street, but why the Federal Reserve and other central banks still have any credibility left. I mean, how many times have they promised an interest rate increase and it doesn't come? It's been over 2 years, right?
Yeah, and it really gets down to market managers believing that the Federal Reserve has their back, and they're playing along with what they believe will be basically a game of musical chairs that hasn't ended yet. The music is still playing, and people are still dancing, and everyone's basically who do understand what's going on, and a certain percentage, whatever percentage it is, maybe 20, 30, whatever percent of the average money manager managing money these days probably is thinking explicitly in these terms. They understand that this game is rigged, that there is an end point, and it's just a question of when the music stops. But as long as the music is playing, they continue to play along because there's money to be made. And maybe it's hubris or what have you. They believe that they'll be able to get out of the way fast enough and still secure their own chair when this music stops in this game of musical chairs.
Well, I'll tell you what could be a new black swan is if OPEC or Saudi Arabia or one of these other large, or maybe a few of these large oil-producing companies, because obviously the shale companies, they're in dire straits right now, but we haven't seen them go bust yet. Mm-hmm. Well, the oil market's been in a bust now for over 12 months, or at least around 12 months. It might be over, give or take. I don't remember the exact date oil started to fall, but it'll be very interesting to see. We have the IMF coming out and saying the Saudis, at their burn rate through their reserves, they've had to start taking on debt now because of their social programs, that the Saudis could maybe survive low oil prices for 5 years before bankruptcy, but the Saudis have the most reserves compared to many of these other countries. So we're one of the things that I saw recently. I think there was a secret meeting here between a Saudi prince and Russia. I think the Saudi prince actually flew up to Russia.
Right.
I wonder what they were talking about. I'm not sure we'll ever be told the truth, but I wonder if it was a massive oil production cut or trying to get an agreement on something like that, or maybe it was about Syria, what to do in Syria or something.
All of the above. I mean, that essentially was what was going on. And I can fully imagine, and we have no evidence to speak to this, but it is only just a matter of basic logic that Putin would suggest to the prince, hey, if we coordinate a little bit on oil, we can get prices up.
Yeah, I don't think I think the Saudis originally, wanted to bankrupt shale oil, and they thought taking the price down here for a little would bankrupt them. But the thing is, Wall Street is backed by the Federal Reserve, and they can, they haven't written off any of these bad loans yet to the shale producers. Although we haven't had a massive amount of bankruptcies yet. We haven't had we've had individual assets sold by oil companies, but not, a total fire sale.
Yeah.
Where large companies are going bust and things like that. I think we're not too far away from that. And same thing for gold and silver. I mean, with the silver price now below 14, the lowest since 2009, gold's below 1100. I really thought gold was going to hold 1100. Maybe it'll start to bounce up after it goes a little bit lower, a quick spike low. Maybe it'll go back to 1100 and above fairly quickly. But, we're at totally unsustainable amounts for the people who provide supply, and especially for oil, because oil is consumed. There's a massive amount of oil consumed. We see these articles about all the oil tankers and the strategic petroleum reserves increase. That's not a massive amount of oil. We're consuming, over 90 million barrels per day of oil globally. So that amount of oil in tankers, it looks like a lot, but globally it's not really a massive amount. So and look at the data of all the shale oil producers. I think it's over 200,000 barrels per day that are coming offline now each month. So we have a lot of oil, Eric, that's coming offline each month. Something has to give very soon. Maybe oil, obviously, the chart patterns are really bad for gold, silver, and oil right now for bearish. But, I mean, at some point, the supply is going to dry up for all three of these.
Yeah, and the elasticity of demand on the oil front, too, is a little bit sticky. It's not such that even when the economy worldwide turns down, there's still a base level of economic consumption dependent on energy. And, maybe we see 2 million barrels per day reduction in demand. We've seen moves like that in relation to economic downturns before, but it's not destroying all demand. There's a baseline here. And then the flip side is
Well, demand should eventually increase with the cheaper prices, right? You'd think demand would eventually start to increase in different places with a cheaper oil price. People would say, oh, you know what? It's only like $15, $20 to fill up my tank now. I'll drive a little bit more each week then.
Yeah, that does play out over time. And in reality, too, just basic economic growth involves the consumption of more oil. And it's a critical component of economic activity. It touches everything. So, the reality of the shale industry turning down and what could essentially be 1 to 2 million barrels per day production out of the United States taken offline over the course of 18 months, we may be looking at something like that. That's a lot of oil. It will, in fact, reboot the bull market in oil at some point. This effort to bankrupt the shale industry is going to end up changing the economic dynamics in the oil market not too distant future. Maybe it'll take 12 months. Who knows? But,
yeah, but for the oil producers and the gold and silver producers, people who are betting on higher prices, who are more short-term oriented, more myopic, we're right around. There's only like 5 weeks or so left in the year. We're going to see. We probably haven't seen it yet. We're going to see tax loss selling. So people are going to dump who were long, who don't have longer time horizons, who aren't value investors. They're going to start dumping what's left of their gold, silver, and oil positions probably through the end of the year, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that'll put more downward pressure on some of these bargain shares. But I'll just provide some comments. I listened to the conference calls for Royal Gold and also Silver Wheaton, which were and Sandstorm Gold, which were in the last couple weeks. But I'll use the comments from the Silver Wheaton CEO, and he's obviously done a lot of royalty deals at larger mining companies, because mining companies do them too. But now there's pure play royalty and streaming companies. But he said in his entire career, he said this on the conference call, it's the best opportunity in his lifetime to do deals, and that's even better than 2008. So he said the terms are that attractive to do deals.
Yeah, this year is not going to be as intense in terms of tax loss selling that we saw last year, because, frankly, so many people who used to be in the mining share sector are just gone. The carnage has been so intense. Well, last year we saw an interesting pattern. The market in the mining shares bottomed out at the end of October, bounced back up, and did pretty well through November. We had a pretty decent move. I mean, and expressed in terms of GDX, saw. I don't know. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but it was more than 20% move at the end of October through November, and then you went back down again because of the tax loss selling. But by and large, the bottom that was hit in GDX in December was above the bottom that was hit in the end of October, and then we had a giant burst of the interest moving through January that peaked out January 24, 2015. I think we're going to see a repeat of that pattern this time around, and that we, in fact, probably, unless the cartel just goes all hell-bent on beating the snot out of the precious metals market, that we are probably sitting at a pretty good buying point for shares. And the tax loss selling is not going to be on a percentage basis as pronounced as it was last December is what we're going to see this time around. And the main reason why is because anyone left in the mining share space largely are strong hand holders. They're holding their shares because they want to have a certain amount of allocation to mining shares as an insurance policy for their overall portfolio. The sector is more hated now than I have ever seen in my entire life.
Yep, yeah, I agree. Sentiment levels are at all, they were negative 6 months ago. They're even more negative now, although there was a little brief rally. But did you hear that Rick Rule of Sprott actually he said the bottom's in?
And so yes, and for Rick Rule to say something like that, I mean, he's very conservative with his prognostications, and he plays with his cards held pretty close to his vest, and he's been looking for a capitulation for 18 months. And talking with him, and he's saying, okay, what we just experienced last year in October, was that the capitulation? No, not classically. I mean, people can go into the archive at Silver Doctors and hear that really fascinating interview that we had with him. But the people with the greatest level of experience in history in the precious metal space can see what's going on, and Rick Rule's a classic example. I mean, we're setting up for very significant supply reduction on a going-forward basis out of the precious metals mining space, combined with just the total insanity of the powers that be and the central banks and the treasury departments and their equivalents across the world, and the Western countries in particular, juggling all of these crazy plates, spinning in the air, and it's just a recipe for whatever the catalyst may be that sets off a few plates falling, and then a complete disaster in our financial markets. And we can look at data and prove that that statement is not hyperbole or a conspiracy theory. When you look at what the Federal Reserve was forced to do a couple of months back in terms of their reverse repo operations, they injected the equivalent of about $500 billion of value in the form of treasury securities into the marketplace, because the marketplace didn't have enough collateral to support the derivatives market positions and other positions that are being held by financial institutions that are essentially walking zombies. And this can't go on forever. I mean, to do that kind of history-breaking action that we all can see but was not reported in the financial media at all. I mean, no Bloomberg story covered this, no Reuters story covered this, and it's a huge move. The Federal Reserve executed operations that dwarf TARP and TALF and so forth on the value and impact when they did those reverse repos. But it's like
and we don't even know what the size of the currency swaps are. So the currency swaps could be in the trillions, many trillions, for, with China, not with China, with Japan, and we're starting to see a lot of other people do currency swaps. I said it on a past podcast. There's, the developed world, the people who are in power now, the European Union, Japan, the United States, England, they're doing currency swaps with each other to maintain the system, maintain the status quo, protect their banks. And then you have China doing currency swaps with the other developing countries to try to set up the next system. So you got all these different groups doing currency swaps for different means and different ends.
Yeah, and I think it was on Welcome to Dystopia when one of our shows we were talking about the aftermath of China's devaluation and then revaluation and tweaking of the yuan, a couple months back. And it was very clear at that point that you could see in the market a giant sudden surge in the yen and these movements in currency market exchanges that suggested, in fact, there were swaps going on behind the scenes because you can see it in the market.
I agree. The currency markets are probably the most, besides the bond market, in interest rates, because all these bankrupt governments need lower and lower interest rates. That the currency markets are manipulated probably even more than the bond markets and interest rates are.
Well, it's one and the same. It's kind of like one side of the same coin. And currency FX transactions on any given day exceed $5 trillion, so you can hide a lot of stuff in that big pool.
Yeah, I completely agree. But, with these low gold and silver prices, there's going to be panic deals. There's going to be fire sale deals. So look for the companies that are doing the acquisitions, that are buying up, that have cash, that were more prudent, were more conservative. I think Lakeshore Gold just bought up a pretty good property, St. Andrews Goldfields, which is a smaller, medium-sized gold producer with a large land package around it. And then you're seeing the larger royalty and streaming companies, which are Franco-Nevada, Royal Gold, Sandstorm Gold, Silver Wheaton. They've all done big deals in the last month or two. And they're looking to do even more deals if terms, the miners are desperate. The miners are going to have to do whatever they can do to survive, because there's not debt available for most of the miners, and there's not a lot of ability for them to sell a lot of shares. Maybe some of these small miners, they can sell, they can maybe buy themselves a month, 2 months, 6 months of time and hope metals prices rise. They can do a small financing. But, if they go into a massive dilution, the share price is going to get shorted by the shorts on Wall Street. And even if they do like a 15 or 20% dilution of shares to survive or something, the stock's going to get shorted 40, 50% on the shorts piling on then.
Yeah.
So you got to look then for who, all investments aren't equal. This is a stock picker's market in oil, gold, and silver. You have to look at production costs and balance sheets and things, who can still generate free cash flow, who's making smart acquisitions. But over the long term, these things are gonna pay off. The great companies, great entrepreneurs build things when sentiment's bad and in bear markets and things like that. There was a lot of great entrepreneurs who built successful companies in the 1929 Depression. A lot of successful companies have been created during commodity bear markets and things like that.
With great change comes great opportunity.
Yep, the Chinese character, right?
Yes.
The crisis and opportunity, they're the one and the same?
Yes.
Okay, well, Eric, we have one scumbag of the week nominee, at least from me. This is from Economic Policy Journal, although he's quoting WikiLeaks, a story on WikiLeaks. Smoking gun tapes released by WikiLeaks relating to corruption in the Bush and Obama administrations. WikiLeaks has released 30 hours of audio recordings related to a disability program at the center of what it says is a multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal. The whistleblowing organization published the secret tapes and transcripts of conversations that took place between 2013 and 2014, exposing details of the federal investigation into the nonprofit agency Source America. The recordings appear to provide evidence of fraud within the administrations of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, with appointees to both presidents allegedly misappropriating funds in a government program called Ability One. The program is the largest employment program for disabled people in the U.S., funneling $2.3 billion a year through Source America to more than 1,000 designated partner organizations. And the tapes, which are still being analyzed, allegedly show that almost half of the funds go to defense contractors and other corporate crony buddies rather than disabled people. Wow, per year. Oh man, so bad. I'll put the link to the rest of the story in there for our listeners who want to look. but looks like lots of money was being funneled to friends. I'm sure that means, appointee donations to their presidential libraries, Obama's library when it gets built, and that'll be, maybe corporate board seats and other stock options and other payoffs and things like that in exchange for this.
Yeah. Well, I've been falling down on a job, and I don't actually have a nominee for us. I've been just way too busy this year. But, hey, it's a rich target field here, and if anybody in our audience wants to propose for the next show, please do.
Yep, and we're not going to do another show before Thanksgiving, so I want to wish our listeners a happy Thanksgiving. Hopefully you have friends and you get to be around the friends and family, at least the ones you like.
Yeah,
and don't eat too much turkey.
Yeah, there you go. And as a parting shot, too, I want to address just one thing that we talked about 2 shows ago, because you tossed in my direction that whole story that came out about the political article that was titled, "Yes, the CIA director was part of the JFK assassination cover-up." It was an article by Philip Shannon, and that created quite a scuttlebutt. And at the time, I didn't have time to dig into what that story was all about. But having 30-plus years of study of the way covert operations work and intelligence agencies and whatnot behind me, I knew as soon as that headline came out that, this is a limited hangout. And we talked about that in brief on the show. And I just want to point people towards a really wonderful resource. If you want to understand how black operations work and intelligence agencies and whatnot, there's no better tool or looking glass to study and understand that world than the JFK assassination. And by far, the greatest podcast collection and archive that's available online is at a place called Black Op Radio. It's run by a guy named Len Osanek who lives in Vancouver, Washington. He's been doing this program for probably like 15 years now. And it's amazing work. And one of the recent shows, in fact, discusses this issue. And let me get the exact show number here. I'm scanning here. It's show number 754. And he interviews Dan Hardway, and also, in fact, spotlights an article that Dan Hardway had published that basically outlines why this was a limited hangout and how it's a limited hangout, and discusses the mechanics by which this, the tool is used to spin the whole context by which people look at the CIA and its role with the JFK assassination. So, an unsolicited plug. And people, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, check out blackopradio.com, and you can see this article in the show number 754. It covers basically the entire picture of what went on 2 months ago with his media splash.
Very good. And just want to thank you again for your time, Eric. I think our listeners will get a lot out of this show. And if you have any other questions or comments, send them to us, wallstreetformainstreet@gmail.com.